fifth video in this series about mutations and disease, and today we're going to look at some genetic pedigree diagrams. So on a genetic pedigree diagram you can see how different characteristics are passed from each generation to the next, and so what you have here is a family tree, and essentially the oldest people at the top and then their offspring on lines joined directly to them. And so in this case George and Arlene are parents to Tom, Sam, Wilma and Anne. Anne's spouse is Michael, and Sandra is Tom's spouse. Obviously Sandra isn't a blood relative to George and Arlene, as isn't Michael. And so if we use this example with albinism, and we refer to people in purple being sufferers, and so in this instance if you're a sufferer and you've got albinism, you therefore need both recessive alleles in order to have it. And so an example of that would be Arlene, who has the genotype small a, and also Tom, who has the genotype small a. Now, on these genetic pedigree diagrams, you can look at people's offspring, you can figure out their specific genotype. So an interesting one here to find out might be George. Now, George, obviously, if you look at it, married to Arlene and has Tom, Sam, Wilma and Anne as kids. And so to figure out what George's genotype is, you have to look at his offspring. Now, if Arlene has it and she has small a, George must pass one of his alleles to his offspring because he's produced kids that have got the condition, so he must be a carrier. So therefore, George's genotype must be heterozygous big A, small a. So another individual that we might quite want to find out what their genotype is Sandra. And so Sandra has, we actually can't tell what her genotype is. So she could be heterozygous or she could be homozygous, healthy in this instance. And the reason why you can't tell is if you look at her two kids, so Daniel and Alan, if you look at those two individuals, they don't have the disease. And therefore, we can't tell whether those individuals are heterozygous, for instance. And so we can't tell what Sandra is. So Sandra could be either big A, small a, or big A, big A. We know that she can't be a sufferer because she hasn't got the condition. And so telling exactly what her genotype is difficult. The only way that you could confirm whether she's heterozygous is if she had a child that suffered from the disease. Now, if we change this scenario somewhat and alter it so that now the allele was dominant for the disease. So let's change the disease completely and assume that it's caused by a dominant allele. And we could see what difference that makes to our genetic pedigree diagram. And so in this case, if the allele is dominant, we could look at Arlene again, and we know that Arlene must be, in this instance, big A, small a. And the reason we can tell that is if we look at her offspring, she's not only produced offspring that have the condition, so Wilma and Tom, but she's also had offspring that don't have the condition. And so if she only had the dominant allele which causes the disease, all of her offspring would therefore have it. And so we can tell that Arlene is heterozygous in this instance because of the presence of Sam and of Anne. Now, a really interesting individual to look on this family tree would be Carla. Now, if we look at Carla, we therefore have to look at what both Anne and Michael's genotype is. And so if we look at these two, obviously Carla has the condition, and so if it's caused by a dominant allele, she must have received one of those alleles from one of her parents. And so we can look here and we can see that both Anne and Michael don't have the condition, so we can tell what Anne and Michael's genotype is. So in this instance, they both must have small a, so they must be homozygous, just with the healthy allele. Now, obviously, this can't be the case because they've produced a child that has the condition. So this tells us, unfortunately, in this instance, that Anne must have been cheating, because otherwise, there's no way they could produce Carla. She must have procreated with an individual who had the condition and therefore passed on to her child.